Welcome to Winds of Change. I am your host, Emy Digrappa. Winds of Change is brought to you by Wyoming Humanities. We share stories about the people, places, and history of Wyoming. The Winds of Change podcast warmly invites Native American leaders, thinkers, and storytellers to join us on this special series focused on celebrating the rich histories, cultures, and voices of Native American communities. And we are eager to include perspectives from across the nation. In this special series, we are celebrating Native voices. And today, my special guest is Connor Ryan. Born at the foot of the Rocky Mountain, Connor Ryan is Hunkpapa Lakota skier who blends adventure with activism. Guided by traditional Lakota knowledge, Connor sees skiing as ceremony, his way of honoring the sacred land. Through storytelling, film, and community engagement, he works to reconnect people to place and uplift the Indigenous voices in the outdoor world. Welcome, Connor.
Thanks for having me on, Emy.
Oh, absolutely. I love having you on. And I'm so excited because just knowing that you grew up in a mountainous area and, well, tell me about your journey. Like, where did you grow up and how did you become skier and love the outdoors?
Yeah, I grew up on the Front Range of Colorado, so kind of all around the Denver and Boulder area. I lived in a lot of the suburbs in between and spent a lot of my weekends growing up camping and playing in the mountains as a kid. Skiing was something I got to do kind of intermittently growing up, I guess I would say. My mom's Lakota and my dad's Irish from Ohio. And he moved out here to ski and go to the University of Colorado. My mom also attended the University of Colorado. And it was my dad who got me into skiing. My mom is a notoriously bad skier among the family. Like of all the family members, she's the least inclined to do that sort of thing. She's like a hot cocoa by the fire instead kind of person. And so, yeah, my dad taught me how to ski. And I got to do that some in elementary school growing up. And then just economically, it just like wasn't something that was an option for me as I was a older youth, if you will, as I was in middle school and high school and stuff. I maybe got to go two or three times throughout that part of my life. Every couple years, I'd maybe get to go once and be like, "Wow, it's definitely something I loved," and I, was like naturally skilled at. But yeah, I didn't really have the opportunity to do, and I also didn't have much of an opportunity growing up to be immersed in my culture. Living on the Front Range of Colorado, I have kind of more of the urban native experience, which is like you get to see your culture maybe more than you get to experience and live it. And so um, finding that connection to the sport and to my culture were two things that kind of came hand in hand later on in my life in my young adulthood.
How did your mom work with you to connect you to your culture?
Like we've always known who we are and where we come from. Um, and so for me, it was like really kind of her empowering me to go back and reconnect, I guess is the way I would put it. When I was 21, I went to the Black Hills for the first time in my life, and well, that may not be entirely true. I think I'd maybe driven through there on a road trip or something like that, but really went and spent time there for the first time when I was 21, and yeah, got to meet folks who knew our culture, who gave me that opportunity to learn more things about where I come from, and when I was there, I actually well, I was at an event and I met other Lakota folks and community from Boulder who happened to have also traveled there for the same event. And so, I went to the Black Hills for the first time to look for a connection there, but actually found a connection culturally that was back at home where I lived as well. And so, yeah, my mom was just always a big part of, giving me those stories about her dad and about, her side of the family. And then I was able to experience Sweat Lodge, Hamblecha, keeping fire for Sundance, things like that. And my mom was just always in my corner in those sort of things, always having my back, watching my fire when I did my vision quests and things like that. And so, yeah, I think that part of it for me was huge. And then really like my mom, she grew up in Los Angeles, which, is far away from home in a lot of ways. But I always look at her as like, despite not having like her roots in our homelands exactly, she just like so well embodies the values of our culture and did that without even having someone to set that example for her. And so, like the generosity and just the family value that my mom has, I think is something that really like empowered me to see the world differently and set me up to have what I would say is like more of an indigenous worldview perhaps than as opposed to maybe what someone would call like a Western worldview, where my mom's just always been someone who takes people in, gives everything that she can to provide for others, and did that for me growing up. Because she had me as a single mom for a lot of her life, and she found a way to become a pharmacist and the matriarch of our family and all these things all on her own. And so that really empowered me. Then by the time I was a young adult, I was able to chase my dreams. As opposed to when she was at that age in life, she was giving everything to my brother and I, and she adopted my cousin and raised her as well. And so, yeah, she's kind of just that person who empowers other people's dreams through what she provides. And so that really set me up to be who I am and to be a skier.
What a great testimony to your mom. I love hearing that.
Yeah, she's pretty awesome. It's great to get to share it. My birthday is right around the corner, and so it always reminds me that, the moms are actually the ones who deserve, I think, gifts when the birthdays come around, because boy, they do a lot of the hard work.
That's true. They do all the heavy lifting,
For sure.
even if you don't see it all the time.
Yeah.
From that journey and learning your heritage, learning your people, and going to the Black Hills, how did you take that back into your life and really start to embrace your cultural heritage and then become an adventurer and a skier?
Yeah, at first for me, I felt a lot of tension between being a skier and being Lakota and being indigenous. For a long time, I looked at skiing as like this thing that I was like, oh, it's a white activity, if you will, with the air quotes around it. And I think like, it is associated with privilege in a lot of ways, the ability to be skiing. And, I think a lot of people, places like Jackson and Aspen and things like that tend to feed into that with some of what the culture around the sport is. But for me, I grew up to and learned how to ski at a small ski hill up the canyon from Boulder called Eldora. It's just above a little town up here called Nederland. And when I was learning my culture at first, I was going to Sweat Lodge, and it was up there in the foothills of the Rockies here, and it was just down the hill from Eldora was where we had our teepee and our Sweat Lodge. And there was a day that my uncle sent me to fill this bucket for the water for Sweat Lodge, and I dipped the bucket into the stream to fill it up, and I realized that stream was the same water that was running off of the ski hill up above me. And took that water down, and they pour it on the rocks in Sweat Lodge, and they're teaching me the lessons about Mini Wichoni, water is life. And I kind of had this realization that like it was me who was creating this separation, and I was learning about my culture, learning, how deeply interconnected we are with with all of our relations in the natural world, with all of nature, if you will. And the same water that brings me to life brings a tree to life, brings all the animals, all the flying creatures, all the beautiful things in the world are brought to life by water. And I realized that skiing really for me was just this way of celebrating when the water falls from the sky and lands on the mountains, and those mountains hold the water, and that duration of time through which they melt is what gives us our seasons, gives us our ecology all around us. And I started to see that, like skiing and the, knowledge that's in indigenous cultural practices weren't two things that needed to be separate. And so for me, that was kind of where those walls started to come down. And I started to realize like, this is something I think more indigenous people need to experience skiing on our land. And at the same time, I think a lot of people who are out there skiing and are deeply in love with the sport don't realize how much deeper their connection to that could be if they knew the traditional ecological knowledge that should come with being out in these places. And so I kind of from there on, started to find a way to make that my mission in life of bridging those two worlds between people who deeply appreciate the land through a sport and people whose whole culture is deeply understanding and appreciating the land and giving them access to this sport. So that kind of became my purpose.
So I get it that you skied a little bit growing up, but you didn't have the real opportunities to, maybe have a season pass and maybe go skiing every weekend. How did you cross that bridge? What did you do to say, okay, I can do this? You understand that it's money, right? Because I know I live here and I grew up in Colorado, so I'm very familiar. And it does have that, unfortunately, I don't say it's a stigma, but just this attitude that only people with wealth do this. And because there is a barrier for people who don't have wealth to be able to ski because it is money. It is money and it's a recreation. And how do you cross that bridge?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I kind of it was really like about where I was putting my attention. I think like both within the sport itself and like what part of the sport interested me, and then also where like maybe to a degree that was sort of foolish to someone else, making it a priority within my life. And so, the first ski gear I had was nothing impressive for sure. I remember my skis weren't quite the right sort for a powder day. My jacket was held together with duct tape. And I worked an entire summer and fall to have enough money left over to stash away and be able to afford a ski pass and some skis. And I got the cheapest ones on sale and the cheapest boots and the cheapest bindings and everything I could find. But I pieced it all together. And then for me, I found a lot of my joy in kind of swimming against the current, in going out there. And at that time in my life, I had a job and I worked at night. And I needed something to do all day in the afternoons, and just a way to keep myself occupied and, off of a screen and out of trouble and those sort of things in my life. It was a time in my life where I was starting to find my relationship to sobriety and getting away from all the things that, seem really interesting when you're, 18 to 21 in particular. Because it was the year I was 21 that I both went to the Black Hills for the first time and started to really get involved in my culture, but also that was when the exact same time that I got into skiing. And so for me, it was really about just like going out there and kind of feeling like the joy in like, I shouldn't be here. And I found a lot of just kind of little moments of victory of going out there and being like, "Ooh, I skied past this guy with his fancy gear and like went flying by him, and I could, if I had the free time, it allowed me to be a better skier than maybe somebody who was working some, big deal job who then could afford to go skiing. That guy only got to go on the weekends, where I was out there 4 or 5 days a week, every week. And so I was improving really quickly, and I really enjoyed and savored kind of that side of it. And also, like for me, the part of skiing that was interesting to me was not like these, people staying in fancy hotels and, you know, having caviar and champagne. I was really intrigued by the kind of folks who were, you know, sleeping in a van down by the river across from the ski area. And that was kind of where my fixation was at. And so as I got more and more into the sport, that's what I really enjoyed about that, was like seeing that there was a big storm coming somewhere, and I would road trip out in my old Toyota Prius, and I would manage to stuff my 6'5" self in the back of the hatchback and lay the seats down and snuggle up in my sleeping bag, and I'd, you know, sleep in a grocery store parking lot somewhere so I could wake up first thing in the morning and get the perfect powder run, and that for me was like kind of what my obsession became. Was, I'd have $100 to my name and be like, well, I can spend 40 of that on gas to make it out to this place, and I can eat, you know, beans and rice and potato chips for the duration of my trip, and I should be able to make it home just fine, and I'll get my next paycheck in a couple weeks and I'll figure it out from there. But in the moment, the only thing that really mattered to me was being where the snow was falling, and just enjoying that to the fullest. It kind of just gave me this sense of, I don't know, there's something rebellious about it, I think, and I think as an Indigenous person, there's something really cool, I think, about finding those ways to like transcend the system that wants to tell us what to do. And I think sometimes the best way to fly in the face of that is like relying on your relationship to the land to sustain you. And for me, like, I don't know how to hunt. I didn't know how to, you know, make a teepee, any of the things my ancestors knew how to do, but I was sustained by my relationship to the land through the joy that it gave me.
Mhm.
Um, and it helped me find my sobriety. It helped me find my culture, like, and so in that way, I took a lot of joy in being this, having this feeling of like, I'm probably the only native guy out on the mountain today, and I'm gonna burn my sage and my cedar before I go skiing, and I'm gonna lay down a little tobacco at the top of my ski run, and I'm just gonna soak all this up, and this is what allows me to get by, and I didn't have a lot of purpose in the world, I think, at that time, and I felt a little like aimless and rebellious, and I just enjoyed that part of it, and I didn't ever really imagine it would turn into something more. I was just living in the moment.
That is excellent that you lived in the moment. And we should all do that more. I think we get so caught up in life, we forget, like, live this moment. Like, don't regret the past. Be grateful for right now. And that's such a good lesson to learn. And it's so great to hear you say that because you're so young. And how did you go from there into filmmaking?
Yeah, once again, it was just kind of one of those gifts, I think, of sometimes you have to like open yourself up to the fact that you don't know in order for something like truly mysterious and miraculous to come into your life. Because people with all kinds of plans and definitions of how things should be, you if you have all that, you might not end up in a space where a miracle could fall right in your lap. And so I think that's a lot of how it was for me. I first had the idea of making a ski film. I believe it was my second Hunkpapa, which is a traditional Lakota vision quest. And that year I did that one over the Thanksgiving period of time, and it was freezing cold that year. And so I did my Hunkpapa inside of the sweat lodge in total darkness. And as I was in there, I had this dream, this vision, making a ski movie that was about uh, the kind of imperative of climate change looming over us as skiers, and this need to embrace, these traditional indigenous ways of being to get back in balance with the land. And so I had that vision, and I just at the beginning of that ski season, I was just starting to build a relationship with this organization, Natives Outdoors, and I shared, with Len, who's like the founder of that organization, what my vision had been. I was like, you know what? Like somehow I want to make this thing, something like this happen. I know this can come to be. And from there, he helped me be a part of a couple magazine articles, one of which was with Patagonia. It turned into, like I got to be on an episode of this really popular show within skiing called the 50 Project, with Cody Townsend, who's a bit of like the LeBron James of skiing, if you will. He's one of the biggest names we got in the sport, one of the best to ever do it. And I had a few people give me that platform, and some folks saw like, okay, this guy's, maybe he's on to something. And so then I was on a flight back to Colorado from Omaha, Nebraska, and I had just exchanged a few Instagram messages with a kid who would go on to become one of my best friends, and closest brothers, a Ute guy by the name of Bird Red. And I just got into a conversation with him about being on Ute land, because for me, skiing in Colorado, I'm always on the lands of the Ute. And we just hit it off. We just had this spark between us of like, we had this back and forth of just like arguing about who was better and who's tougher between Utes and Lakota. And like, there was a fun energy to that. And at the same time, we had a deep respect for each other's, different cultures. And that kind of turned into me being like, we should make a film that features myself and Bird, and we should talk about the land. We should go beyond this idea of a land acknowledgement, because it was at that point in time, that was 2019, 2020, something like that Bird and I were having these conversations, that the land acknowledgement was starting to really be a rising tide within the spaces of the outdoor industry and ecology and science, and people were starting to realize that mattered, that shifted people's perception. And I wanted to take that even a step further. And so yeah, on one flight, I put together a pitch deck for a movie, which was something I had no idea what that was, but I was really lucky to have Cody Townsend as a friend and a mentor, and he'd sent me an example of, well, this was the pitch deck for the 50 Project. And I was like, well, this is the best show in all of skiing. So if I can use this somehow to make something that translates my idea. And I did that, and I sent it to a number of brands within the ski industry and a film production company, and everybody kind of had this interest in it. And we found a way to come together and to make this film the following year, which became Spirit of the Peaks. And it was an incredible journey and experience. The making of it, I think the behind the scenes could be a whole film of its own. It was a great journey, and I got to do a lot of amazing things with one of my best friends, Isaiah, who's Isaiah Branch Boyle. He's a Ute filmmaker, and it just all fell into place kind of miraculously. And then the movie came out and was featured in film festivals and won all kinds of awards and did great online. And yeah, it just was this experience of just like having a vision that was so far bigger than myself that I couldn't execute on my own. And just everywhere I turned, I kind of met the next person or the snow fell at just the right moment for us to make an incredible ski film that I think has had a lasting impact, you know, not just on myself, but on the ski industry as a whole, and what we've been able to do to bring more Indigenous people into the space of skiing.
That is truly inspiring that you followed your path, you followed your dream, and you created something, and it has lots of accolades with it. I think what's interesting to me is that not just the what's next, but what is the impact that you want to make or you feel has made for young people in the skiing industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is like skiing changed my life so much.
Mhm.
Uh, it gave me this ability to go out into the world, and you know, I'm a backcountry skier, in large part. That's my favorite expression of the sport. Not to say that I don't really cherish my days inbounds at Winter Park where I live. I definitely do. That ability to look out into the world and see a mountain and see a line on it that you want to ski. And it's just this formidable relative in the distance. And then you approach it and you find a way, step by step and little by little, to find your way up a mountain and then down it. And it takes years of knowledge and relationship building to know how to do that. And to me, it was that process that then turned into like, okay, how do we make a movie? Okay, how do we build a program to get other Indigenous people on the mountain? Like everything to me after that became a mountain. This step by step process of how do I climb it? When's the safe time to do it? How do I make my way down? What kind of team will I need around me to pull that off? And I realized that process of like recognizing what a challenge is and envisioning the way that you have to execute in order to pull that off was so synonymous for making any other dream come true in life, that it was the mountains themselves that I wanted to share with young Indigenous people across the country. Because for me, I realized like if I could take a kid from, you know, the res, or a kid from an urban native community who just making it down a run for the first time is this totally foreign and formidable challenge, and I could help them to figure out, okay, well, let's envision one turn at a time. Here's how we're going to get down. That's where we need to pizza. That's where we need a French fry. This is how we're going to break this up. And we're going to do this thing that seems scary and impossible right now. That if I could help them to do these little things that felt scary and impossible, that it was a way of training their mind to move forward into life and realize like there are going to be so many other challenges that are out there that feel scary and impossible and foreign to you. And if you know how to break it down, if you know how to ask for help, if you know how to celebrate your own little victories along the way, then you're going to know how to tackle these really big challenges. And that was what I wanted to share most, because you meet kids and their interest is, you know, maybe it's in music or it's in art or it's in science or whatever it might be, but there's so many problems in the world to be overcome. There's so many challenges ahead of us as human beings that are terrifying. That like as I look at all those challenges in the world that terrify me, I know I can't solve all the world's problems. But what I want to be able to share with young Indigenous people in particular is the ability to overcome challenges and knowing that they're capable of doing things at the end of a day that they woke up in the morning incapable of doing. And so that really became what it was about for me, is just like, how can I find a way to share this part of it with as many kids as I can? And maybe one of them or two of them or however many someday also get to be a professional skier or a filmmaker like I am. But what I'm more interested in is like the kid who's going to be a, you know, a scientist in, you know, climate or energy or some bigger issue that I'm not smart enough to tackle, um, who can look back on their experiences and be like, I can make it over a mountain. That's how I feel about the world, and the mountain in front of them in life is much larger, even than the mountains in front of me as a professional skier. And so, maybe the relationship and connection that they feel to nature and to themselves and to their community because of skiing empowers them to do things that I could never do.
So here's my last question. You've had a really great journey, and I want to know, how are you connecting with kids on the reservation who really don't have the same opportunities that even you've had? If you think about it, how are you connecting them and encouraging them and teaching them that, the metaphor you use, that life is a mountain that you're going to climb and that you're going to face it. And I love that. And so how do you relate to kids who are on the reservation, who want a dream, they just don't know how to go forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so there's a number of ways that I like to do that. And for me, like my career as a professional skier looks a lot different than a lot of other people. A lot of people compete for years so that someday they can be in ski movies. And I kind of skip the competing phase of things and I make ski films, I make indigenous ski films. So like for me that's come in the form of like one making films that these kids can see themselves in. And in order to do that has meant like building relationships with kids on the res and taking them out for these kind of adventures and being in ski films with them. My friends Bird and Cyrus and Napashni and so many kids that I've gotten to work with and be in films with me, like they really live this, and it makes it. I think it makes a difference in their lives and in who they are, and like we're accountable to one another. We have community with one another, and then I spend a lot of my time traveling and connecting with indigenous community around the world, or around Turtle Island, I should say. I've actually never left Turtle Island as a continent. So when I say around the world, I mean Canada and around the United States. But yeah, and going to their communities and getting out and skiing with them. There's a lot more communities that now have programs that take their kids out skiing, volunteering with them, getting on the mountain with those kids. And then we've worked to connect those kind of programs with the ski areas and with nonprofit partners to keep building those programs out, and then starting some programs on my own. So I work with Icon Pass, and we do a scholarship program between Natives Outdoors and Icon Pass, where we give away ski passes along with ski
Mm-hmm.
lessons
Mm-hmm.
and all the gear that a kid needs to ski, or an adult for that matter as well. There's a lot of young or even middle-aged indigenous adults who can sure as heck use this kind of influence in their life as well. And so yeah, we built out a program, and it started the year that Spirit of the Peaks came out. We started with 10 scholarships, then we built our way to 15, and the last 2 years we've given away 30 scholarships a year to indigenous and First Nations folks across Turtle Island. And that gives them the ability to learn how to ski, and from there own everything that they need to go skiing, so that they're empowered to do that. And something that we find is like when you start a ripple like that, especially in indigenous community, what I found is that we have folks who've gotten our scholarship program, fallen in love with skiing or snowboarding, and then find a way in their own community to get a grant and start a program for their kids, right? Because that's something about like, if you give an indigenous community, like that carries on and on and on. That's how reciprocity works. When we know that within our communities. That's why that we when we take something from one of our animal relatives, one of our plant relatives, we offer something back to the earth. We lay down that tobacco, we give that prayer, that song, whatever it might be. We have an understanding that if you do that, then the next time you go back, you've built a relationship, and that comes back tenfold, and so that's what I found is, like you give one really awesome person who wrote this incredible essay about what it would mean to them to be a snowboarder or a skier. If you give the person who cares that much the opportunity, then you turn around in a year or two and they've given that opportunity to two or three more people themselves, and those people have found two or three more people of their own. And so we've found this like movement, I think, really across the sport of like a lot more indigenous people getting into skiing and snowboarding. The first time I went out to ride in the backcountry with another indigenous person, that was Len Nessifer and I had gone skiing at Winter Park, and then we took a backcountry lap up on Berthoud Pass, which is just right across the way, and that would have been 2018, I believe. And we're just reveling in this idea of like, whoa, I've never backcountry skied with another indigenous person. Like, how powerful is this? And now, just what is it, 7 years later, is a daily occurrence for me. Like, my regular crew of people that I go backcountry skiing with and make ski films with are all indigenous people, and we don't think anything of it in quite the same way. And I can, I don't have enough fingers and toes to count all the organizations that I know are taking their kids out there to experience this. And I think it's just like, it's a self-perpetuating sort of healing, much like happens in an ecosystem. You go back like the first year after a fire and you're like, ooh, these first little shoots are popping up. Maybe just the first fireweed is starting to take root. And then season by season, you go back more and more, and you're like, whoa, like the more biodiversity there is one year, the more there will be the next year and the year after that. And it's just exponentiating until, at some point an ecosystem heals itself so much, you look and you're like, well, there was a fire here at some point? Oh, right, okay. I guess there's some charred sticks still left over here, but it's hard to see underneath all the flourishing. And I think that's kind of the vision that I have for our community. And I think, it's obviously much bigger than just this one sport, but for indigenous people, wherever we're at, whatever our passion is, so long as we take this approach to it, and our approach is that we gain things in order to be able to share them. That's my biggest rule of everybody who sponsors me as a professional skier is like, if you sponsor me, you sponsor my community. It's going to take a little more gear than it takes for the next guy down the line. So are you up for that kind of challenge? But then it grows way more. And so I think that's been the really rewarding thing, is just seeing like, if you put that generosity into something, then it becomes something that not only sustains you, which is a great feeling, but sustains everyone around you. And so I'm just honored to just get to have a little role within that. And, like, it makes it really easy for me to volunteer and give now, because there's so many other indigenous communities that are flourishing on the mountain, and they're finding a way to take back their relationship to the place. They're building stronger economic and ecological sovereignty through being in the outdoors and recreating outside.
Well, really, absolutely. But I think that you've inspired people to give them a voice, to go outside and say, I can do this. I think that's what your inspiration is. That, I think, I feel that the indigenous communities are really taking on their voice right now. And I love seeing that.
Yeah, I'm honored to get to be a part of it. When I think I look around, and when I started, I had that feeling, you call it like imposter syndrome, right? Where you're like, oh, do I belong here? And I think for indigenous communities, like, we're finding a way pretty quickly to erase that imposter syndrome in the spaces that we're in, that we're learning to take up space within. Because when you look around and you start seeing all these other indigenous people show up in the space with you, you just go like, oh yeah, no, I do belong here. This is my homelands. This is who I am, and I've got community around me. And very quickly you go from that like nervous energy of like, am I an imposter, to all of a sudden you're just laughing and
Right.
smiling, just like you would be in community in any other way. And then from there, like, the creativity and the imagination and the hope and all those things that come with it are just so natural.
Right. What a good feeling. Good
Yeah,
for you, Connor. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me. It's been such a pleasure. And I really look forward to seeing some of your films. It'll be fun.
absolutely. I can't wait to come share them with you and your community.
Thank you.